Pozdravljeni na 8. festivalu KURJA POLT in letošnji po vrsti 4. konferenci kultnega filma. Letošnja konferenca, kot veste, poteka po spletu. Vsak dan od torka 8. junija do petka 11. junija bomo ob 2 popoldan predvajali po eno predavanje. Zadnjemu predavanju pa bo potem v petek sledil še pogovor z vsemi gostujočimi predavatelji. Z nami letos so filmski teoretiki in teoretičarke iz avstralskega Melbourna dr. Aleksija Kanas, iz Velike Britanije pa dr. 𝗚𝗵𝗵𝗶𝗲, dr. Shellie McMurdo, dr. Johnny Walker in ja, to je njegovo pravo ime, in pa stara dobra znanca konference kultnega filma, dr. Steve Jones in dr. 𝗚𝗵𝗱𝗲. Torej, sprememba od naše tradicionalne konference, razlika je ta, da je seveda, kot rečeno, konferenca letos na spletu. Ta je bolj žalostna in negativna, seveda bi si želeli, da bi se tako z vami, slušatelji, kot z našimi strokovnjaki lahko srečali v kinu. Je pa tudi nekaj pozitivnega. Ponavadi je vodilo konference to, da prosimo predavatelje, da svoja predavanja nekako, če tudi ohlapno povežejo z našimi filmi, ponavadi z osrednjo tematsko retrospektivo. Letos, ker ne morejo biti z nami, smo rekli, da jim damo popolnoma svobodo, popolnoma proste roke in jih povabili, naj nam predavajo o tistih temah, s katerimi se v svojem raziskovalnem delu najbolj intenzivno ta hip ukvarjajo. To, kar se je zgodilo, je, da je projekt letos obrodil 4 izjemno različna predavanja, tako vsebinsko, torej po predmetih obravnave, kot po formi, kot boste videli. Več o naših predavateljih in njihovih predavanjih si lahko preberete na spletni strani. Zdaj pa jaz prepuščam besedo svojemu glavnemu pajdašu v snovanju, v kuriranju in tudi v organizaciji vsakoletne konference, britanskemu filmskemu teoretiku dr. 𝗚𝗵𝗵𝗶𝗲u iz Univerze Northumbria v Newcastlu. So, also hello to our international audience tuning in for the Cult Film Conference at KURJA POLT Genre Film Festival in Ljubljana, Slovenia. The conference will be conducted in English entirely from Tuesday, June the 8th to Friday, June the 11th. And to introduce our speakers and start off this conference, I'd give the word to my main partner in the crime of curating, of organizing our annual Cult Film Conference, British film scholar Dr. Russ Hunter from Northumbria University. Russ, unfortunately, this year I can't say the stage is yours, but the stage is only one. The screens are many, and the screens are definitely yours. Take it away, please.
Hi everybody, welcome to another cult film conference at KURJA POLT. Really pleased this year to be back presenting another cult film conference to everybody. Well, not back, obviously. We're not in Ljubljana this year, unfortunately. The horrors of the pandemic have been many, and one of those of which is, unfortunately, of course, we're not able to travel to be there with you. So we've done something a bit different this year. We've gone fully online. So what we're doing from the 8th to the 11th of June is we're going to post a video per day from the conference. And then that's going to culminate on Friday the 11th with a Q&A, where what I'm going to do is talk to each of the speakers in turn and ask them questions and unpick a little bit some of the ideas present within their presentations. Obviously, it's been a really challenging 18 months, really, hasn't it? We have not been able to be in the cinemas. We've not had that feeling of watching films communally, of seeing things on the big screen. We've all been watching stuff at home. We've all been addicted to Netflix and various other things. One of the things I think we've all really missed, however, is watching films together in an environment like KURJA POLT. That's really what we've missed. We've missed going into festival screenings and either loving or hating what we saw, or not being sure about what we saw and thinking about what our favourite scene was, what disturbed us the most, what was just the most bizarre thing that we saw. We've missed all of that stuff, and the kind of chat that goes on in the bar afterwards and in the coffee shops and beyond. So it's been a big miss for us, and for that reason we're really sad that all of us are not going to be with you at KURJA POLT this year in person. We miss all of you guys, and of course we miss the wonderful city of Ljubljana as well. So what are we going to do this year, or rather what are our speakers going to talk about this year? So we've got some speakers that you will know and some speakers who will be new to you if you're a festival veteran. So first up, we've got Shellie McMurdo and 𝗚𝗵𝗵𝗶𝗲 from Hertfordshire University, who are going to talk about video and analogue and the place that it has in modern horror cinema. Increasingly, that we see video used aesthetically, we see it used thematically sometimes within horror films, and they're going to kind of unpick what that means and why maybe that might be happening. Then we've got 𝗚𝗵𝗵𝗶𝗲 who's going to talk to you about the post-punk scene in Melbourne and how that's resonated in cinema, how it's become it's a sort of ghost really that's sort of haunted certain aspects of contemporary cinema. Then we'll have the festival stalwart, Steve Jones. Steve is going to talk about a particular turn in the slasher film. And he's going to look at the way in which the slasher film was developed and actually look at a particular moment that he argues we're at the moment that we've been at since sort of the mid-2000s that represents a real change for the way the slasher film operates. And then our final presentation is going to be Johnny Walker. Johnny is going to talk about activist filmmaking, but specifically about activism within horror filmmaking and what potential the horror genre has for activism and what that might perhaps mean even for horror much more generally. And Johnny Walker is indeed his real name, by the way. Anyway, that's all to come for you. Hope you enjoy the presentations. Please do get in touch with any of us if you've got any questions or any queries. And hopefully we'll see you all again in person next year and we can all enjoy a beer together in the bar and indeed talk about what we found crazy, scary, weird, strange at KURJA POLT 2022. Thank you.
Hello everybody, thanks so much for watching our talk and a very big thank you to the festival team for having us. My name's 𝗚𝗵𝗵𝗶𝗲.
And I'm Shellie McMurdo. So we're going to talk about the ways that the contemporary horror genre uses the trope of VHS video in both its stories and its aesthetics. This is part of a wider reappropriation of analog media formats within recent horror films, television and other horror media.
And we're calling this trend dead media. Now, obviously, the dead in dead media evokes themes of death and haunting at the heart of the genre. But the term is also indebted to Bruce Sterling's Dead Media Project, which was an archive of obsolete technologies initiated in the 1990s as digital formats began to take off and take over from analog. And we're especially interested in how dead media objects such as vinyl records or obsolete modes of photography and film, and especially video, now function within the contemporary horror genre. And we're particularly interested in the ways that analog forms have been re-embraced by horror filmmakers and fans.
A recent raft of films, limited series, games, podcasts, and other horror media use analog objects at the centre of their narratives to explore the malevolent possibilities of dead media in the digital age, or utilise analog aesthetics such as glitches, static, or other forms of media degradation. In contemporary horror, dead media is utilised in various ways, as an object of nostalgia, as a reverent nod to the genre's past, to forefront a gritty analog aesthetic, or to engage with the horror of recording, repeating and recycling, which is ever more relevant in our hypermediated world.
And you can see a few examples of that here. So on the top here, we have a VHS cover for a video game from Puppet Combo. There is video aesthetic in the middle there from the film VHS. And an advert, the poster for the podcast 𝗩𝗶𝗱𝗄, which we'll talk about in a little while. And on the bottom, there's a still from the Shudder series Dead Wax. There's Barbara Crampton, who is a 1980s horror icon in the 2016 film Beyond the Gates. And finally, a still from the film Polaroid.
Horror has, of course, always reflected the threats of technology, and haunted, cursed, or dangerous media has provided fertile ground for horror narratives. We might think here, for example, of menacing TV broadcasts found on new frequencies and channels, whether that's a supernatural threat in Poltergeist or mind control conspiracies in Videodrome, or what happens when the ghosts are in the set are captured on videotape, copied and passed on like a curse, as in Ring.
Horror and science fiction has often reflected contemporary anxieties about the spread of evolving and new media forms, and it draws from the paranoia over concerns from the potential harms threatened by these technologies. In the early 1990s, we see this in films like Brain Scan, about a video game in which players take the role of a murderer, only to discover their actions apparently have deadly consequences in reality, or in Ghost in the Machine, which sees a killer's soul uploaded into an MRI machine, allowing him to travel around computer networks and the electrical grid, possessing various devices and objects to kill people. This echoes the electrical threats in 1980s films like Pulse and Shocker, but it also preempts the spread of the internet, which naturally became a source of horror at the turn of the millennium.
Fear.com deals with a website made by the victim of a murderer. In Pulse, ghosts enter the world of the living via the internet. And My Little Eye combines the internet horror with surveillance anxieties around CCTV. And even more recently, that's evolved into the screen and social media horrors of films like Friend Request, Unfriended and its sequel Unfriended Dark Web, Cam and Host, all of which reflect the potential horrors of the ways we engage with others online. So horror's obsession with the technological and with media forms is nothing new. But the genre has generally engaged with the threat of the unknown in new or developing media formats. And instead, we're especially interested with the way it's begun to use older, obsolete or outdated formats like video as historical haunted objects.
And this coincides with a particular reverence for the late 1970s and 1980s, which is reconfigured in contemporary horror in interesting ways that emulate the styles, forms and themes of the era. 1980s horror, which was fairly maligned for a while as an age of slashers and sequels, has been re-evaluated and re-embraced. And we can understand this on some level as part of a generational, cyclical pattern of homage, influence and inspiration, which is traceable in the 2000s remake cycle, which started with adaptations of 1970s films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Dawn of the Dead, but by the early 2010s was remaking 1980s genre films like Nightmare on Elm Street, Maniac, Fright Night and The Evil Dead.
And there is also a broader media trend towards retro aesthetics, both the obsession with 1980s period settings and also the use of contemporary retro style. We can see this in Summer of '84 and House of the Devil, which are both set in the 1980s and emulate the style of the period, and in various levels of homage in We Are Still Here, The Void, VFW, and the cosmic horror of Mandy and The Colour Out of Space. Films like It Follows and The Guest are set in indeterminate or vague time periods, but evoke 1980s genre films, and practical special effects by new artists such as Dan Martin have once more become revered.
There is a sense then that horror which looks or somehow feels analogue is in fashion, and this is painfully apparent in this trailer that we're going to show you from Netflix, which promotes a number of its original horror titles as 1980s video trailers.
Now available on Netflix. The best name in horror entertainment. Bird Box. Sandra Bullock, John Malkovich. Don't lose sight of survival in this suspense-filled thrill fest. Bird Box. Will you survive? Take your goddamn blindfold off! The Babysitter. Samara Weaving slays her way through this ghastly cult classic, filled with gruesome special effects and witty slapstick. Dreamgirls can be a nightmare.
Teddy, God!
Oh my God, he shot me in the boob! What kind of dick shoots a girl in the boob?
Before I wake, you'll stay up all night with these nightmarish chills and unforgettable scares. Before I wake, fear your dreams. 1922. Adapted from horror master Stephen King, Thomas Jane will discover that your darkest secrets never stay buried. The Silence. Stanley Tucci stars in this nail-biting thriller about creatures who hunt their human prey by sound. Don't make noise or you just might be next. With these terrifying movies and more, you'll never have to leave your couch again. Netflix horror hits. Available now.
Okay, so the irony of the dominant subscription streaming platform framing slick, polished thrillers like Bird Box as rental videos is not lost on us. Perhaps the most obvious analogue obsession in horror is with VHS then, and this manifests in the genre in a few ways.
Firstly, via a continued culture of video collecting. In the UK, for example, the video nasties panic of the 1980s provided a list of titles which ultimately functioned as a collector's dream, and rare tapes can still trade for large amounts of money. The contemporary obsession with 1980s retro aesthetic extends to video collecting. New ventures have capitalised on this connection between horror collecting and VHS aesthetic by releasing beautifully rendered video editions of recent horror films, contained in clamshell boxes with lurid 1980s-esque cover art, like these collaborations between Broke Horror Fan and 𝗏𝗏𝗱𝗏 pictured here.
A second way in which horror engages with video is through film style and form. Most notably, video technology is often used in the found footage subgenre. Many found footage films rely on first-person point-of-view camera work and the camera as witness and raw footage captured and found as evidence. So if we think of the look of found footage, whether it's produced by the high-definition consumer model camcorders of Cloverfield or Paranormal Activity, or the professional high 8 and 16mm video cameras of the Blair Witch Project or Cannibal Holocaust, all these have something in common.
Describing the aesthetic of Cannibal Holocaust, Neil Jackson lists various features, including location shooting, handheld cameras, imperfect compositions, degraded video imagery, lens phenomena, direct camera address, and sound irregularities. And we could now consider those commonplace within the subgenre. While found footage as a subgenre shares aesthetic tropes, variations in the look of these films occur because, of course, in most instances, the characters are recording with the appropriate technology for the time and their personal circumstances. Paranormal Activity's Mika demonstrates his wealth by buying the newest top-of-the-line home video equipment, and the student filmmakers of Blair Witch alternate between Heather's treasured 16mm camera and their film school loaned high 8.
In the last decade or so, however, some found footage films have rejected contemporary digital technology to instead engage specifically with video as an object of the past, as a form of dead media. And this might be via a period setting. So Paranormal Activity 3 is a prequel set in 1988, as you can see the date stamps on the camcorder footage at the bottom there. And this provides a backstory to Katie's possession in the original Paranormal Activity film. Also in WNUF Halloween Special, which is a 2013 film that is presented as a home recording of a 1987 broadcast of a TV station's Halloween show, in which a crew investigate a supposedly haunted house.
The 𝗏𝗏𝗶𝗏 tapes and VHS, however, both feature found videotapes within their stories and in their posters, as you can see. And they include those as records of past violent acts and supernatural occurrences. These films are set in the modern day, but are largely made up of footage from earlier decades, explained via their respective framing stories.
In the first film, which is a faux documentary, the eponymous 𝗏𝗏𝗶𝗏 tapes are a collection of several hundred videos discovered by police, which document in first person the actions of a notorious serial killer over several years in the 1990s and early 2000s. VHS is an anthology horror film which consists of 5 shorts with a wraparound narrative in which a gang break into a house under contract to steal a VHS tape. And strangely, they decide to watch some of the videos they find stacked up in a room with a corpse.
These films alter their imagery and sound by using glitches, static and tracking effects to emulate home video. Images curve and waver as they're cut through with tracking lines and sound crackles and skips. Combined with the unstable point of view of found footage, these qualities, or intentional lack of quality, depending on your perspective, amplify the eerie and uncanny nature of the footage.
Caitlin Benson-Allott argues that these VHS aesthetics have an illicit quality, that they leave a viewer with the impression that a film was unethically obtained, that we're not supposed to be watching these images. Now, this is, of course, the case with the Poughkeepsie tapes and the VHS videos. They document various horrors, but moreover, they're showing us something forbidden, the personal collection of a serial murderer and a mysterious archive of supernatural events, which we watch along with a burglar. It's not clear whether these recordings in either films were ever intended specifically for us as their audience. And this illicitness coincides with a third way that contemporary horror engages with video. So we've talked a little about video collection and reverence for VHS among fans and filmmakers. Then we've got the use of video aesthetics in texts. And then there's also the idea of VHS as a haunted or cursed medium, a kind of supernatural connection between spirit and human worlds.
And this is most obvious in the Ring series, which features a supernatural videotape that curses anyone who watches it, unless they copy and share it. Ring was part of a cycle of Japanese techno-horror films at the turn of the millennium. Alongside the cursed tape, there's mobile phones in One Missed Call, the internet in Pulse, and a viral pop song in Suicide Circle. Jay McRoy argues that these films blend imagined ideas of a traditional Japanese past and its supernatural themes, and the equally imagined technological horror of a global and postmodern Japan.
This clash between traditional and natural and modern and supernatural is really clear in the iconic images of the film's conclusion of Sadako crawling through a television screen. This uses the ethereal and the technological and suggests a collision of the ancient and the modern. The equivalent scene in the American remake The Ring sees the ghost appear through the television in a similar way.
Pick up the phone, Noah. Come on, pick up.
As she crawls through the television, however, she's still very much a part of the cursed videotape. The colour and the texture of her skin is actually the saturated blue colour of the film, peppered with static, and she moves towards her victim by disappearing and suddenly reappearing much closer, like a jump cut, as if she's been edited from her video and superimposed in reality. The remake and its sequel use other video visuals, glitches, static and so on to emulate the much copied haunted videotape, but also to suggest that you might just be watching a version of something like it. But with a 2002 theatrical release and a home video release in 2003, just 2 years before DVD outsold VHS in America, many viewers may not have recognized the aesthetic of a pirated tape, and ironically, using digital effects to recreate an analog aesthetic just makes this monster look all the more digital.
Later Japanese sequels transferred Sadako's curse to digital forms like viral videos and mobile phones. By the third American feature, 2017's Rings, VHS is treated as a retro curiosity. So early in the film, a college professor spots a VCR at a flea market surrounded by tapes of Jurassic Park and Alien, and finds the video lodged inside it before transferring it to digital file. In the late 1990s, DVD was already on course to render video obsolete in Japan, but using formats on the verge of extinction perhaps emphasizes the horror of the past. Mitsuyo Wada-Marciano argues that it took the mainstreaming of DVD in the mid-2000s for Ring to find a significant global audience. Prior to this, its following was large but localized as a result of its distribution on video in different countries. In the US, however, distributors had secured the rights to remake the film in the year 2000, and so they withheld any home video release of the Japanese film until after their 2002 remake came out. Ring's reputation instead relied aptly on the circulation of pirated video copies. This was how it found its way to the producers of the remake, who recalled that it was a low-quality duplicate of a duplicate, which only added to its aesthetic.
Nakata's original film is dimly lit. It has a cold colour palette of muted greys, greens and blues. And on the low definition of VHS, and even on early scratchy DVD transfers, the picture was mudded, shadows were prominent and contrasts were blurred. At a time when the early shift to digital promoted and celebrated crisp, high-definition images, seeing Ring in this lower quality only made it all the more effective, especially if you were watching it on the same almost outdated VHS format at the heart of the story. In 2019, Arrow Video released a new 4K restoration from the original negative, produced in collaboration with director of photography Junichiro Hayashi. Hayashi insisted at every stage that they kept taking the colour grading darker and darker still to try to retain this gloomy look that's in the original film. But despite this, the inevitable shifts in shadows and contrast in this 4K version mean that much of the grainy look of the original film is lost.
When Sadako's cursed video fills the screen, there's an instant reversion to VHS aesthetic. But what's missing is a blurring between the film itself and the video within it. The distinction between high-definition digital and analog technologies is really clear. The potential effect of Ring itself connecting to Sada's video, a haunted film within a haunting film, is lost. There's something interesting in this idea that digital transfer impacts the overall look of a film which once relied on the lower quality of VHS as part of its viewing culture, and how a horror series about a cursed videotape has remained relevant when the death of that technology is only underlined by the story's retelling on new digital formats.
Some horror films and other horror media texts have managed to combine these three aspects of video, engaging with the cult of VHS collecting, drawing on video aesthetics, and dealing with video as an actual object of horror. Before we talk about these a little bit more, this trailer for the film Beyond the Gates neatly demonstrates at least two of those things.
Welcome, curious viewers. Have you the courage to go beyond the gates? Who dares take the first turn?
I'll do it.
Your fate waits within the challenge cards.
What does she mean by that?
Roll the dice! The other world awaits you!
Look out!
Your souls are mine. Let's party. Beyond the gates.
Available in KB Toys, Babbage's, and Lionel Playworld. Suggested retail price $19.95. Prohibited in the state of California.
Sounds quite cheap if you ask me. So Beyond the Gates is a 2016 film about estranged brothers Gordon and John, who return to their hometown after the disappearance of their father to pack up his video store, where they find and play the eponymous video board game that you saw in that trailer. Videoman in the middle here is a 2018 Swedish film about Ennio. Like Morricone, he helpfully explains to another character. Ennio was formerly considered the best video retailer in the country, but he's now an alcoholic, plagued with debts, and sleeping in a basement with just thousands of tapes for company. Ennio becomes paranoid that somebody is out to get his newly acquired and highly valuable VHS copy of Zombie. 𝗵𝗱𝗶𝗲 on the end there is a podcast rather than a film, but we're including it because its themes are so closely connected to these other films. Its protagonist, Mark Cambria, researches an elusive collector's item, the fabled white tapes connected to the 𝗵𝗱𝗶𝗲, which was a video store famous among collectors in this story. Mark discovers that the tapes, of course, act as a gateway to a demonic underworld. Shudder, which is a horror streaming service, hosts the podcast. And on the platform, it's accompanied by a video loop of a man testing, cleaning, and stacking rows of white tapes.
All three of these feature visual or sound signifiers of video, for example, glitches or static, and all three feature a synth or electro score, digital creations which further connote an analog era through their associations with 1970s and 1980s horror soundtracks. Videotape itself becomes a fetishized object in each of these texts. While each of the narratives is in some way concerned with video collecting and collections, scenes like these center on VHS as a treasured object in itself. Tapes are cleaned and categorized, inserts pressed, cases shelved, handled with care.
This video aesthetic has been used recently by many horror films as part of a retro approach to the genre. We talked already about how Paranormal Activity 3 and WNUF use glitch, static, and tracking lines in order to look like found objects from the 1980s. Meanwhile, 2020's 𝗵𝗶𝗱𝗶 uses similar techniques to emphasize the potential horror of our attachment to video media and the supposed influence of video content on human behavior, but it does so as part of a 1990s setting and style.
However, 𝗵𝗱𝗶𝗲𝗄, Beyond the Gates, and Videoman are set in the present day. They're not period pieces and they're not recreating an era. Instead, they engage nostalgically with video as an artifact of the past and play with complementary retro styles and genre conventions. For example, Beyond the Gates, which you can see here, feels like a 1980s horror adventure, something like Monster Squad, but with the gore of 80s splatter films. Videoman is a contemporary social drama, but with allusions to the Italian gialli of Fulci, Argento, and Bava. And 𝗵𝗱𝗶𝗲𝗄 frequently references popular horror of the past.
The function of videotapes in these stories varies, but each tape acts as a conduit in its own way. In Beyond the Gates, 𝗵𝗱𝗶𝗲𝗄, and VHS 2, this is literal. Entities exist within the object, waiting to be played to engage with the human world. In Videoman and 𝗵𝗶𝗱𝗄, this is much more nuanced. Ennio has nightmares about his past and paranoid ideas about a mysterious giallo-esque stalker named Faceless. His visions and delusions are always tied to video. In his nightmares, he appears to be captured on VHS. In 𝗵𝗶𝗱𝗄, protagonist David becomes further detached from reality the more he engages with a mysterious interactive video. Just as with Ring, these haunted objects subvert the assumption that media technologies are benign, that they're here to benefit or help or entertain us.
Tapes are associated with key themes of memory, nostalgia, aging, or loss. In the 𝗵𝗱𝗶𝗄 tapes, the Water Street butcher revisits his tapes to relive his memories of murder. In 𝗵𝗶𝗱𝗄, David's mother suffers from dementia, and watching old videos prompts comforting memories of her past. Meanwhile, in Beyond the Gates, Gordon and John's dad is lost, and clearing his video store provokes memories of him and their childhood. In Videoman, Ennio has lost his once revered status and reminisces about the 1980s with his new girlfriend Simone. Their memories fade just as tape degrades and decays. Each of the texts laments the decline and inevitable death of the medium of video itself.
This gradual loss is emphasised throughout the narratives in a clash between new and old, digital and analogue. But of course, these two things are intrinsically linked in these texts, just like they are in Ring. Glitch, static and other signs of degrading are largely digitally created, and furthermore we're watching these on digital formats. So digital and analogue blend here just as much as they juxtapose. The characters demonstrate disdain for digital technology, which is presented as an inconvenience or a blight. Ennio refers to the digital plague and chastises Simone for her obsession with Instagram, and they can't watch DVDs together because they're in the wrong region. His collector friend Bosa wears a t-shirt proudly declaring analog not digital. In Beyond the Gates, Gordon says his dad didn't have faith in the DVD revolution. And in Videomannen, Mark is plagued with technical issues as he makes his podcast, and at one point he states, "So much for the convenience of digital." VHS Viral, the third film in the VHS series, features a wraparound story seen on digital camera, but with some of its anthology segments presented in an analogue style with video quality.
Many of these narratives focus on collector characters. In Videomannen and Videomannen, the protagonists are collectors of rare horror tapes, while in Beyond the Gates it is Gordon and John's absent father, Bob, who preserved a collection of popular and cult VHS in his shop. In VHS and the Poughkeepsie tapes too, the focus is on private archives of video. Collecting and collections are integral aspects of these characters' identities. From the recounting of Bob's fruitless attempt to keep his video store relevant and his subsequent spiral into alcoholism, to Ennio's sense of self-worth being entangled with artifacts from a past decade and his self-description as a relic. The characters place an enormous value on VHS, not just in a monetary sense, but on the physicality of the tapes themselves. In Videomannen, Mark remarks that there's something amazing about finding a movie on a shelf and getting seduced by the outrageous box art and making that physical commitment to watch an actual tape. When DVDs came along, they looked and sounded fine, but they were missing something tactile.
So VHS is not just positioned as preference to inconvenient or incomplete digital or ephemeral streaming, but as a format with a physicality which is considered superior to DVD in these films. And as Ewan Kirkland has noted, old media technologies contribute a sense of the real perceived as lacking in digital media. So it's not just the ownership of these artifacts that the characters value, but their place in time and memory. And this is a value that is sometimes ignored or invalidated by other characters.
For example, in Beyond the Gates, Gordon notes to his girlfriend Margot that he doesn't want to end up like his father, who he classifies as some drunk weirdo with an irrelevant video store. Conversely, his brother John is instead reluctant to close down his father's video shop or get rid of the enormous VHS collection housed within it. In several scenes of the film, John lingers over the shelves of VHS tapes, flagging up different films in an attempt to prompt childhood memories from Gordon, who in contrast wishes to just box up the shop and move on with his life. John's alignment with his father, who is unwilling to embrace modernity or the digital age, is then exemplified in the scene where the two brothers meet, presumably for the first time in years, and Gordon remarks that John is still wearing the same clothes he wore when he was 12.
So, these collector characters are concerned with preservation, protection, nostalgia and memory, which places them in sharp contrast to others that view VHS as a useless artifact from a past decade. Most clearly in Videomannen and Beyond the Gates, these characters' preoccupations with collecting is often framed as being stuck in the past, and this is a barrier between the collectors and the other characters because they're reluctant to move forward. This is embodied in a comment by Faceless to Ennio in Videomannen when she spits at him, "I hate you fucking guys, obsessing over old shit. What, you can't connect with people so you try dead things instead?"
But despite the collector's behaviour being connected to their difficulties or downfall, collector behaviour is also simultaneously framed as a subject of status, integrity, and a source of pride for these men. And the collectors are always men. Ennio, for example, chides a junk seller for only charging 10 krona for an ex-rental copy of House of Psychotic Women, noting that it should be at least 200 kroner. And he's also visibly alarmed at Simone undercharging him for a copy of Zombie. Scare Package is a recent anthology horror film with a wraparound story set in a rental shop, populated solely by men who frequently demonstrate their knowledge of the genre, especially from its video heyday.
Collectors also take on the role of protector or keeper of the flame. Mark Cambria in Video Palace at one point notes that VHS only lasted about 20 years, so there are all these underground trash classics that will never be released digitally, and they'd be lost forever if it wasn't for people like me searching them out and collecting them. Others also place value on the physical media itself, but aren't quite as poetic as Mark. Ennio's friend Oscar remarks that although he doesn't watch VHS tapes anymore because of the poor image quality, that, of course, I still collect. Ennio, meanwhile, views his basement video collection as a time machine for which some people would pay a lot to visit, while another collector adds that this is a fucking museum, this is cultural heritage. Above all, there's a sense that the collector characters would enjoy sharing their collections and knowledge, but that the only people that would ever appreciate it or that are worthy of it are, as Ennio puts it, other connoisseurs like him.
And the connoisseurs they refer to are coded as the audience that would watch these films. That audience is us. There is a lot of love and respect in these texts for their collector characters, the subcultural capital they hold, and their level of knowledge and expertise. In many ways, therefore, the collector character functions as a connection between the filmmakers and the audience. And these films are in complex communication with the genre fandom that their characters are positioned as being part of. So among the knowing nods and references, for example, are in Videomannen, debates over 𝗏𝗏̀ci versus Argento, and a heated conversation over hardcore inserts and whether Rosalba Neri had an appendix removal scar or not. In Video Palace, Mark laments being outbid on a copy of Tales from the Quad-Ed Zone on eBay. And the title of Beyond the Gates stands as a reference to 𝗏𝗏்ci's biography, as well as featuring 1980s horror icon Barbara Crampton in the antagonist role. In Scare Package, a cameo by horror critic and television host Joe Bob Briggs is introduced by a character saying that he would have forgotten more about horror than I'll ever know. And although his cult status is rooted in science fiction, not horror, Wil Wheaton appears as the seemingly friendly host of the video in 𝗏𝗏𝗏. These films contain references that function as another level of pleasure for viewers familiar with giallo, video nasties, horror fandom, and the splatter flicks of the 1980s.
These films not only act as love letters to decades past, but actively engage with the new retro trend in contemporary horror. Actors such as Chase Williamson and Justin Welborn recurrently feature in these texts, and retro horror director David Bruckner appears in a cameo in the final scene of Beyond the Gates, asking the mysterious owner of a curio shop, "Do you have anything from the 80s?" The silent man in Shudder's video accompanying Video Palace that you can see here is Sam Zimmerman, who's the platform's curator. The VHS films feature an array of contemporary horror filmmaking talent, including Ty West, Adam Wingard, Joe Swanberg, Radio Silence, and Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. These texts then, like their collector characters, celebrate video culture, but they also lament fading memories of video rental stores, while acknowledging that our memories too will fade.
The endings of some of these texts offer characters closure. And just to give you a spoiler alert, if you don't want to know the endings of these films, then please do skip ahead for a minute, or feel free to stop watching now, as we're just wrapping up. In Beyond the Gates, although they mourn their father, John and Gordon are able to repair their sibling relationship, and Gordon happily returns to his life with Margot, safe in the knowledge that John has moved on and laid the past to rest. Meanwhile, in Videomannen, a compromise is reached. Ennio and Simone agree to build a new life together, and that will be one that straddles the past of giallo and Italian disco, but one that has also a firm footing in the present day.
In far more bleak endings, in Video Palace, Mark's girlfriend Tamra retraces his steps and realises that he never made it out of the basement of the mysterious video shop, and he's now literally trapped in a white tape, a relic of the past. In 𝗁𝗵𝗱𝗲, protagonist David slowly loses his mind as he gets closer and closer to his video pal Andy with violent and tragic consequences, as this gruesome image suggests. So although these texts are similar in their nostalgia for 1980s horror, video collecting and VHS aesthetics then, their endings offer different conclusions about the future of that nostalgia and of video itself.
So we hope that this has offered an interesting overview of some of the ways recent horror has continued its obsession with the dead media of video, by using analogue aesthetics, telling stories of haunted tapes, video collectors and cultures, and examining the tension between the past and the present through a grainy VHS lens.
We're really sad that we can't be with you there this time under current circumstances, but really hope to see you in future. Thanks so much for watching.
Be kind, rewind.